Why do you think the people who swarmed the Capitol on January 6th were mad? And why haven't we talked about that?
Well, first off, I would tell you that I think the January 6th committee was a partisan committee in the Congress of the United States. And it failed its historic mission of bringing the facts forward.
Yep.
And I know your commitment to bringing all the facts to the American people, Tucker. And I know we're grateful for that. And the truth of the matter is, as some members of the staff of the January 6th committee said after it adjourned, they spent all their time focused so much on one individual and on placing blame that they spent very little time focusing on law enforcement failures that happened that day and intelligence failures that happened that day. And I hold to the view that we can never let this happen again. We can never allow the capital of the greatest nation on earth to be subject to a riot for any purpose, for any motivation. And for that reason, we need to understand why law enforcement that day was not better equipped, better prepared, where the intelligence failures were.
Tucker Carlson is pushing January 6th insurrectionists as heroes again. And even though Mike Pence was on their murder list that day, now he's running for president, which means he can't mention that they were terrorists. He can't mention that we have talked about why they were so mad. Their Didi and Donald Trump told them he didn't even lose, over and over and over and over again, despite reality. Well, now that Tucker sees that Mike Pence seems unwilling to make a case for his own life and his views, he tried it with America's military assistance in Ukraine as well, with this blanket conclusion about religious leaders there.
It's very clear that the Zelensky government has arrested priests for having views they disagree with. That's not consistent with religious liberty. It's an attack on it, and we're funding it. And I'm just wondering how is it, and I don't mean to be disrespectful at all, but I sincerely wonder how a Christian leader could support the arrest of Christians for having different views.
Well, what I can tell you is I asked the Christian leader in Kiev if that was in fact happening, and he assured me that it was not. People were not being persecuted for their religious beliefs. Now,
he said let me
take a break here. I know we disagree on this strongly, but I respect your right to your opinion on Ukraine, and I trust you'll respect mine. Look.
Tucker insinuated that Christian leaders were arrested for simply having Christian beliefs, but it appears to be an assumption made without relaying some nuanced details.
2 weeks back, Peczersk Lavra was raided by Ukraine's security service looking for pro-Russian activity. Other Ukrainian churches affiliated to the Moscow Patriarchate have been searched too. Ukraine's Orthodox Church structure is fractured. Traditionally, it was subordinate to Moscow. Following Russia's February invasion, the branch, still affiliated to Russia, renounced its Moscow ties. But suspicions of collusion remain. A priest from the Lavra was arrested for supposedly leading a pro-Russian chant. Alleged anti-Ukrainian propaganda was seized in other church raids.
Since it's nearly impossible for the casual Tucker Carlson supporter to determine exactly who's right and wrong in this debate over allegiances among the clergy in Ukraine, Tucker knows that his synopsis and his conclusions will be adopted without any question. But nothing gets a MAGA insurrectionist going like a huge element of their January 6th motivations. Those damn voting machines.
With regard to voting machines, I would tell you we had them in Indiana, but in Indiana and elsewhere, they produced paper ballots. Recounts were taken in states around the country. And I think it's absolutely essential that we do everything in our power to restore public confidence in the one person, one vote principle at the heart of this republic.
Why not just get rid of electronic voting machines and call it a day, and then we don't have to debate it?
Well, I would certainly be open to that.
Is there a downside?
But what I believe, Tucker, is that states govern elections. States ought to conduct our elections.
So once again, it's these meritless arguments against the legitimacy of the 2020 election that emboldened MAGA foot soldiers to invade the Capitol in the first place. So Tucker cackles and shouts, "Paper ballots!" ignoring these simple facts. Voting systems were determined reliable, despite all of those conspiracies, over and over and over again. Details. After the 2020 presidential election, a coalition of federal cybersecurity and election officials, along with the state election officials and representatives from those voting machine companies, issued a statement calling it, quote, the most secure in American history. That same group said that there was no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. This was due largely to paper records being available for an estimated 93% of ballots cast and a system of post-election checks to test the accuracy of the electronic tabulators. In Georgia, the presidential vote was counted 3 times, once entirely by hand, and each tally affirmed President Joe Biden's win in the state. And unironically, the conspiracies pushed by folks like Tucker motivated MAGA supporters to actually try to defraud our voting systems. What they did find was that rogue election workers sympathetic to the conspiracies might use their access to election equipment and the knowledge to launch an attack from within. A poll worker in Michigan was charged with inserting a personal thumb drive into an electronic poll book during the state's primary, while authorities in Colorado are also investigating a case in which a voter is suspected of tampering with a voting machine earlier in the year. Mike Pence doesn't really seem to be buying everything that Tucker Carlson is selling. But as Carlson plans to form his own media company via Twitter, he still has a party leadership open to buttering him up, conspiracy theories and all. Probably because of the hundreds of millions of dollars he and Neil Patel are looking to raise for their venture. It's one that would quite obviously peddle in lies and half-truths. These are some elements that are quite standard for a crowded primary field that's nearly void of any useful policies at all for the American people. You might want to look out for a little bit more of this fake news on the horizon.